Karma rarely strikes instantly, but when it does, it hits with the devastating force of a commercial jetliner. At JFK International, a power-tripping senior gate agent decided to publicly humiliate a young black teenager dressed in baggy sweatpants. Smiling smugly, the agent ripped the girl's $10,000 first-class boarding pass right down the middle, convinced she was protecting her prestigious airline from a scammer. But she made one catastrophic, career-ending mistake. That quiet, exhausted 19-year-old wasn't a fraud. She was the only daughter of the airline's billionaire owner. The brutal, inescapable fallout that followed is a flawless masterclass in why you should never, under any circumstances, judge a book by its cover. The relentless November rain battered the massive glass windows of JFK International Airport's Terminal 4, turning the tarmac into a blurry sea of flashing neon lights and gray concrete. Inside, the atmosphere was a stifling mix of recycled air, spilled stale coffee, and the palpable anxiety of 1,000 delayed travelers. 19-year-old Maya Hayes just wanted to go home. She was running on less than 3 hours of sleep, having spent the last 72 hours crammed in the Columbia University Library finishing her midterm architecture projects. Dressed for pure survival rather than style, Maya wore a faded, oversized gray hoodie, loose black sweatpants, and a pair of scuffed Jordan 4S. Her dark curls were pulled up into a messy bun, and the heavy bags under her eyes were barely concealed by her large, wire-rimmed glasses. She didn't look like money. She didn't look like power. She looked like an exhausted college student desperate for a pillow. At Gate B22, the boarding podium for Sovereign Airways, Flight 408 to London Heathrow, was commanded by Beatrice Carmichael. Beatrice was a 22-year veteran of the airline. At 50-something, with her blonde hair lacquered into an immovable French twist and her tailored navy blue uniform pinned flawlessly, she considered herself the ultimate gatekeeper of the skies. To Beatrice, flying first class wasn't just a transaction. It was an exclusive country club, and she was the bouncer. Over the years, her dedication to customer service had warped into a bitter, hyper-judgmental superiority complex. She had a very specific, incredibly outdated idea of what a first-class passenger was supposed to look like. "They're letting anyone into this terminal these days," Beatrice muttered under her breath to her junior gate agent, a nervous 20-something named Chloe. Beatrice's sharp eyes scanned the crowded seating area, her gaze stopping abruptly on Maya, who was dragging a battered black duffel bag toward the boarding lanes. "Look at that one," Beatrice whispered, a cruel smirk playing on her red-painted lips. "Hoodie. Sweatpants. Probably flying basic economy, Zone 6, and she's going to try to board with the Diamond Medallion members. Watch, they always do." Chloe shifted uncomfortably. "She looks tired, Bea. Maybe she's just a student." "This is Sovereign Airways, Chloe, not a Greyhound bus station," Beatrice snapped, straightening her silk scarf. "Image is everything. Our premium cabin clients pay $10,000 a seat so they don't have to rub elbows with the riffraff." The overhead PA system chimed with a soft, melodic tone. "Good evening, passengers. Sovereign Airways Flight 408 to London Heathrow is now beginning the boarding process. At this time, we invite our first-class passengers, as well as our Sovereign Diamond Elite members, to board through the priority lane." Maya let out a long sigh of relief. Finally. She hoisted her heavy duffel bag onto her shoulder and made her way toward the blue-carpeted priority boarding lane. As Maya stepped onto the carpet, Beatrice immediately bristled. Her eyes darted from Maya's worn-out sneakers to her brown skin, her face instantly hardening into a mask of aggressive, fake polite authority. She stepped out from behind the podium, physically blocking the entrance to the scanner. "Excuse me, miss," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for the nearby business travelers to hear. "I think you're confused. This lane is reserved strictly for first class and Diamond Elite members." Maya blinked, pulling her headphones down to rest around her neck. "I know, I'm in first class." Beatrice let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. "Oh, really? First class? Honey, I think you misheard the announcement. Economy boarding zones 4 through 6 won't begin for another 40 minutes. You need to step aside and clear the red carpet for our priority guests." Maya felt a familiar, exhausting sting of profiling, but she was too tired to argue. She simply reached into her hoodie pocket, pulled out her phone, and opened her digital boarding pass. "I didn't mishear," Maya said calmly, her voice even and polite. "Here's my boarding pass. Seat 1A. Beatrice's eyes narrowed into dangerous little slits. She snatched the phone from Maya's hand without asking, a clear violation of airline protocol, and stared at the digital screen. The name read, M. Hayes, First Class, Sovereign Diamond. Beatrice's mind raced. There was no way. People who looked like this girl did not fly in Seat 1A on Sovereign Airways. In Beatrice's prejudiced worldview, there was only one explanation. This was a scam. "We'll see about this," Beatrice muttered, marching back to her podium with Maya's phone. At the podium, Beatrice aggressively typed Maya's confirmation number into the terminal computer. The system immediately brought up the reservation. Everything was perfectly in order, paid in full. But Beatrice wasn't satisfied. Her ego was already invested in proving this young black girl didn't belong. She noticed a small, standard administrative note on the file. Booked via corporate master account. To Beatrice, who had zero understanding of high-level corporate accounts, this was the smoking gun. In her mind, corporate master account meant someone else's credit card, someone else's points, a stolen login. "Just as I suspected," Beatrice said loudly, her voice echoing in the quiet boarding area. Several men in expensive suits in the line behind Maya began to murmur, annoyed by the delay. "Suspected what?" Maya asked, stepping up to the desk. "Give me my phone back, please." Beatrice placed the phone on the counter, but kept her hand firmly over it. "This is a fraudulent booking. You're traveling on a ticket purchased with a flagged corporate account. Who did you steal these miles from? Your employer? Or did you buy a hacked login online?" Maya's jaw dropped. The sheer audacity of the accusation momentarily stunned her. "Are you out of your mind? My father booked that ticket for me yesterday. It's not stolen." "Your father?" Beatrice mocked, rolling her eyes. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England. Let me explain something to you, little girl. Fraud is a federal offense. I have dealt with scammers like you for 2 decades. You find a stolen credit card, you book a luxury flight, and you hope the gate agent is too stupid to notice. Well, not on my watch. I am not a scammer." Maya raised her voice slightly, the adrenaline finally cutting through her exhaustion. "Scan the barcode. The system will accept it. Let me on the plane." "I will do no such thing," Beatrice sneered. She tapped a few keys on her keyboard. With a malicious smirk, she deliberately clicked the Suspend Segment button on Maya's itinerary, temporarily locking the boarding pass in the system under a security hold. The receipt printer on the desk buzzed, spitting out a physical, paper copy of the boarding pass, now marked with a large, red void across the top due to Beatrice's manual override. Beatrice picked up the paper ticket and held it up for the crowd to see. "I am confiscating this fraudulent travel document, and I am canceling your reservation. You are not flying Sovereign Airways today. In fact, you might not be flying ever again once I report you." "You can't do that," Maya said, her hands trembling not from fear, but from raw, concentrated anger. "You have no right to cancel my flight based on your own racist assumptions." "Racist?" Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls in mock offense. "How dare you? I am doing my job protecting this airline from criminals." Before Maya could reach across the desk to grab the paper, Beatrice gripped the boarding pass with both hands. With a sharp, theatrical movement, she ripped the heavy cardstock straight down the middle. Ripe. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the terminal. The businessman standing directly behind Maya, a silver-haired executive named Arthur Pendleton, actually gasped out loud. "What are you doing?" Arthur stepped forward, his face flushed with disbelief. "You just destroyed her property. I saw her screen. She had a valid boarding pass." "Stay out of this, sir, or I will deny you boarding as well," Beatrice snapped, drunk on her own power. She dropped the 2 torn halves of Maya's ticket into the trash can behind the desk. The ticket was a fake. "The matter is settled." She looked back at Maya, her eyes gleaming with toxic triumph. "Now, I want you to take your cheap little duffel bag and walk away from my gate. Because if you don't, I am calling Port Authority police, and you will be leaving this airport in handcuffs." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over gate B22. Every eye in the vicinity was locked on Maya. Chloe, the junior gate agent, looked like she was about to throw up, entirely paralyzed by her senior co-worker's unhinged behavior. Beatrice stood tall, her chest puffed out, waiting for the girl to crumble. She expected tears. She expected a panicked apology. She expected Maya to tuck her tail between her legs and run away like a frightened child caught in a lie. Instead, Maya took a deep, steadying breath. Her posture completely changed. The exhausted, slouching college student vanished. In her place stood a young woman radiating an icy, terrifying composure. "You want to call the police?" Maya asked, her voice dropping an octave, deadly quiet and perfectly articulated. "Go ahead, call them, because I am not moving a single inch." Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, unsettled by the girl's sudden shift in demeanor. But her pride wouldn't let her back down. "Fine. You asked for it." Beatrice grabbed the desk radio. "Security to Gate B22. We have an aggressive, fraudulent passenger refusing to leave the boarding area. Send officers immediately." Within 2 minutes, the heavy footsteps of airport security echoed down the concourse. 2 burly Port Authority officers, led by a veteran named Officer Jenkins, pushed their way through the crowd of gaping passengers. "What's the problem here, B?" Officer Jenkins asked, resting his hand on his utility belt as he surveyed the scene. This young woman, Beatrice pointed a manicured, accusatory finger at Maya, attempted to board an international flight using a stolen first-class reservation. When I confronted her and confiscated the fraudulent ticket, she became hostile and refused to vacate the premises. I want her removed, and I want her detained for fraud. Officer Jenkins turned to Maya, his expression stern. "Miss, is this true? Do you have ID?" "I have my passport," Maya said calmly, pulling her navy blue U.S. passport from her pocket and handing it over. "And no, it is not true. My name is Maya Hayes. I am 19 years old. My ticket was legally purchased." This woman took one look at my sweatpants, decided I didn't belong in first class, locked my reservation in her computer, and physically tore up my boarding pass. Jenkins frowned, opening the passport. "Maya Hayes. Okay. Look, miss, if the airline says your ticket is voided, there's nothing I can do. You have to leave the secure area." "I am not leaving," Maya repeated, her eyes locked dead onto Beatrice. "If I walk away now, she gets away with this. And she is not getting away with this. Miss, if you don't step back, I'm going to have to physically escort you out, and you will be charged with trespassing," Jenkins warned, taking a step closer. Arthur, the businessman, spoke up again. "Officer, with all due respect, I watched the whole thing. The gate agent is entirely out of line. She profiled this kid." "Thank you, sir, but we'll handle this," Jenkins replied gruffly. He pulled a pair of zip-tie handcuffs from his belt. "Last warning, miss." Beatrice crossed her arms, a sickeningly smug grin plastered across her face. "Goodbye, scammer." Maya didn't flinch. She simply picked up her phone from the counter. "I really didn't want to do this," Maya muttered to herself. She unlocked her screen and dialed a number she had on speed dial. It only rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. "Maya? Sweetheart, aren't you boarding right now? The flight takes off in 20 minutes. "Hi, Dad," Maya said, her voice finally cracking just a fraction. The stress of the moment bleeding through. "I'm trying to. But I'm at gate B22, and your gate agent just accused me of credit card fraud, tore my boarding pass in half, and called the police to have me arrested." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a heavy, terrifying pause. When David Hayes, the self-made billionaire, ruthlessly efficient businessman, and absolute majority owner and CEO of Sovereign Airways Holdings, finally spoke. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Put her on speakerphone, Maya." Maya lowered the phone from her ear, tapped the speaker icon, and placed the device flat on the boarding podium, right in front of Beatrice's pristine keyboard. "Hello?" Maya said. "You're on speaker, Dad." The voice that echoed out of the small phone speaker was crisp, commanding, and instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever sat through a Sovereign Airways corporate training video. "This is David Hayes, Chief Executive Officer of Sovereign Airways." The voice boomed, carrying a weight that made the air in the terminal suddenly feel ice cold. "Who is the senior agent currently operating Gate B22? Beatrice Carmichael's face drained of all color. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror as her eyes darted from the phone to Maya, and finally, to the realization of exactly whose ticket she had just destroyed. For 10 agonizing seconds, the only sound at Gate B22 was the rhythmic drumming of the November rain against the terminal windows. The silence from the boarding line was absolute. Every passenger, from the silver-haired Arthur Pendleton to a young couple holding a sleeping toddler, held their collective breath. Beatrice Carmichael stared at the sleek black smartphone sitting on her podium as if it were a live grenade with the pin pulled out. The color had drained so rapidly from her face that her heavy foundation looked like a chalky mask. Her perfectly lacquered French twist suddenly seemed too tight, pulling her skin taut over widening, terrified eyes. I asked a question. The voice of David Hayes crackled through the phone's speaker, the icy calm in his tone far more terrifying than if he had been screaming. "Who is the senior agent operating my gate?" Beatrice opened her mouth, but her throat had completely seized up. A pathetic, dry clicking sound was all that managed to escape her lips. Officer Jenkins, the veteran Port Authority cop who had been moments away from slapping zip ties on Maya's wrists, slowly lowered his hands. He looked at the phone, then at Maya's navy blue passport still resting in his palm. He read the name again. Maya Hayes. He looked at the airline logo on the desk Sovereign Airways and pieced the puzzle together with the speed of a man whose pension depended on it. Jenkins gently, almost reverently, handed the passport back to Maya and took two very distinct, very deliberate steps backward, distancing himself from Beatrice. Mr. Hayes?" Beatrice finally stammered, her voice shaking so violently it barely registered above a whisper. This is Beatrice. Beatrice Carmichael. Senior gate agent. Employee ID." She trailed off, her mind blanking on a number she had typed every day for 22 years. "Beatrice Carmichael," David repeated. The way he chewed on the syllables made it sound like a death sentence. "Let me make sure I understand the situation, Beatrice. My daughter, Maya, who is flying on a ticket booked directly through my personal executive suite, is currently standing at your podium. And instead of boarding her on Flight 408, you have accused her of a federal crime, confiscated her property, and called the authorities to have her arrested. Is my understanding of these events accurate?" Panic, raw and unfiltered, finally overrode Beatrice's paralysis. She scrambled for a lifeline, her pride desperately trying to construct a defense out of thin air. "Sir, Mr. Hayes, sir, I can explain." Beatrice practically shouted at the phone, leaning over the podium. It was a security protocol. Her ticket, it was flagged in the system under a corporate master account. We've had a rash of stolen mileage accounts lately, and her attire, she didn't match the standard profile of our premium cabin clientele. I was protecting the airline's assets. I was protecting your assets, sir. Arthur Pendleton, the businessman standing behind Maya, let out a loud, scoffing laugh. "Protecting assets?" You sneered at her, told her she didn't belong, and literally ripped her ticket to shreds because she was wearing sweatpants. "Shut up," Beatrice hissed at Arthur, her professional veneer completely shattering. She turned back to the phone, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Mr. Hayes, the passenger was non-compliant. She was aggressive." "That is a lie," a small, shaky voice interrupted. Everyone turned. It was Chloe, the 20-something junior gate agent. She was standing a few feet away, clutching a stack of luggage tags to her chest like a shield. Her face was flushed, but her eyes were determined. She looked directly at the phone. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Chloe Vance." "Wait, sorry, Chloe Miller." "Junior agent," she corrected herself, stumbling over her words in her nervousness. Maya was perfectly polite. She showed her digital boarding pass. Beatrice snatched her phone without asking, suspended the segment in the system manually to print a paper void, and then ripped it in half. Beatrice told her she looked like a scammer. Beatrice whipped her head around, her eyes blazing with absolute betrayal. "Chloe, how dare you?" "Quiet," David Hayes commanded. The single word cracked like a whip through the speaker, instantly silencing the gate. "Chloe, thank you for your honesty," David continued, his voice shifting to a professional, measured register. "Do not let Flight 408 push back from that gate. Hold the aircraft. What is the name of the JFK station manager on duty tonight?" Chloe swallowed hard. "It's Richard Sterling, sir." "Call Richard. Tell him he has exactly 3 minutes to get to gate B22, or he can mail his ID badge to corporate in the morning." "Beatrice, step away from the podium. Do not touch the keyboard. Do not speak to my daughter again." The line clicked, dead. The dial tone echoed through the terminal, sounding like the final bell of a heavyweight fight. Maya calmly reached over, picked up her phone, and slipped it back into her hoodie pocket. She looked at Beatrice. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just stood there, letting the crushing weight of the silence do the work for her. Beatrice slowly backed away from the computer terminal, as if it were radioactive. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in front of her perfectly tailored navy blue skirt. The arrogant, untouchable gatekeeper of the skies had vanished, replaced by a terrified woman standing on the precipice of professional ruin. Richard Sterling was a man who deeply appreciated order in a world built on chaos. As the JFK station manager for Sovereign Airways, his daily life was a relentless, high-stakes juggling act. He oversaw hundreds of daily, international, and domestic flights, managed thousands of unionized employees, and was directly responsible for millions of dollars in daily revenue. He was the conductor of a massive, deafening orchestra of jet engines, baggage carts, and anxious human beings. He was sitting behind the heavy oak desk in his soundproofed, climate-controlled office, tucked away in the administrative bowels of Terminal 4. The clock on his wall read 9:45 p.m. He was sipping a lukewarm, overly bitter espresso and meticulously reviewing the runway de-icing protocols for the incoming winter weather front when the phone on his desk rang. Not his standard multi-line office phone, the VIP red line. It was a sleek, solitary piece of hardware that sat on the corner of his desk, and it almost never rang. When it did, it meant one of two things: a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar operational failure, or the chief executive officer. Richard's hand jerked, and he violently spilled the lukewarm espresso directly down the front of his pristine white dress shirt. He didn't even grab a napkin. He scrambled across the desk, his heart hammering against his ribs, and snatched the receiver. "Sterling speaking," Richard answered, his voice tight. "Richard." The voice of David Hayes was dangerously low, lacking any of its usual booming corporate warmth. It was a tone of voice that froze blood. "I am going to ask you a question, and your entire career with my airline depends on the answer. Why is my 19-year-old daughter currently being threatened with arrest by one of your gate agents at B-22? Richard's stomach dropped so fast and so hard he felt physically nauseous. The blood rushed from his head, leaving a loud ringing sound in his ears. "Mr. Hayes? Maya is here? Sir? I had absolutely no idea she was traveling through JFK tonight. Arrested? What? I don't pay you to ask what, Richard. I pay you to manage this airline." David's voice cracked like a whip through the earpiece. "You have exactly 2 minutes left to get to gate B-22 and fix this. If she is placed in handcuffs, you will be joining her in the unemployment line." The line went dead, with a sharp, final click. Richard didn't bother grabbing his suit jacket. He didn't grab his umbrella. He bolted out of his office with such force that his heavy leather chair slammed backward into the wall. He sprinted down the carpeted hallway of the administrative wing, bursting through the heavy, secure double doors into the main public concourse. Richard was a 50-year-old man carrying an extra 20 pounds around his midsection, but sheer, unadulterated terror lent him the speed of an Olympic sprinter. The terminal was a blur of flashing neon departure screens and polished flooring. His leather dress shoes slapped loudly against the terrazzo. He dodged rolling suitcases, slipped past startled, shouting tourists, and physically vaulted over a discarded yellow wet floor sign, his heavy, two-way radio bouncing violently against his hip with every stride. His lungs burned, grasping for the recycled airport air, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. Gate B-22. Gate B-22. Please don't let her be in cuffs. Please, God, let me get there in time. When Richard finally arrived at the boarding area for Flight 408, he was drenched in cold sweat, violently gasping for air, and sporting a massive, dark brown coffee stain completely ruining his chest. He slowed his sprint to a heavy jog, pushing his way through the outer perimeter of standing passengers. The scene at the gate was frozen in a bizarre, suffocating tableau. The heavy, rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass was the only sound. Maya Hayes stood calmly at the entrance of the red-carpeted priority lane, her posture perfectly straight, her hands resting easily in the pockets of her oversized gray hoodie. A veteran Port Authority officer was standing awkwardly to the side, looking deeply uncomfortable. His hands held up in a placating gesture. The junior agent, Chloe, was frozen behind the podium, clutching a stack of baggage tags to her chest like a protective shield, her eyes wide with fear. And then there was Beatrice Carmichael. Beatrice was standing a few feet away from the podium, staring blankly at the floor, completely stripped of her arrogant armor. The line of wealthy first-class passengers had grown substantially, but not a single one of them was complaining about the delay anymore. They were entirely captivated, holding their breath as they watched the live-action corporate execution unfolding right in front of them. "Miss Hayes?" Richard gasped, pushing his way past the velvet ropes. He stumbled to a stop directly in front of Maya, doubling over slightly, resting his hands on his knees as he fought to catch his breath. "Maya, I am Richard Sterling, station manager for JFK. I am so incredibly sorry." Maya looked down at the panting, coffee-stained executive. She didn't look angry, she just looked profoundly exhausted. She offered a small, polite, and terribly mature nod. "Mr. Sterling, it's fine, really. I just want to go to sleep." Richard straightened up, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He adjusted his tie, and as he turned away from the CEO's daughter and toward the boarding podium, his face hardened into a mask of pure, concentrated fury. He saw the torn, jagged pieces of the heavy cardstock boarding pass resting near the top of the plastic trash can. He looked at Beatrice, who was actively, desperately avoiding his gaze, her shoulders hunched. "Beatrice," Richard said, his voice trembling with a potent mixture of residual adrenaline and boiling rage. "What have you done?" "Richard, it was a misunderstanding," Beatrice pleaded, taking a hesitant, shaky step forward. Her voice was whiny, high-pitched, and entirely devoid of its usual sharp, condescending authority. Her booking looked highly suspicious. The computer system flagged it as a corporate master account, and I was just following the standard fraud prevention guidelines. "I thought she was a scammer, Richard. You followed fraud prevention guidelines by manually overriding a confirmed Diamond Elite ticket, destroying passenger property, and calling the Port Authority to arrest the chief executive officer's daughter?" Richard barked, his voice echoing loudly across the silent gate. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. "Did you even bother to ask for her physical ID before you accused her of a federal offense?" Beatrice looked down at her polished black heels, her silence serving as a loud, damning confession. "Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable," Richard muttered in disgust, turning his back on her. He looked at the trembling junior agent. "Chloe, log into the terminal under my executive override the security suspension. Print Miss Hayes a new boarding pass, immediately." "Yes, Mr. Sterling." "Right away," Chloe said, her fingers flying frantically across the keyboard. Within seconds, the thermal printer buzzed, spitting out a pristine, crisp new boarding pass for Seat 1A. Richard took the pass, smoothing it out. He turned back to Maya and handed it to her with both hands, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of total deference. "Miss Hayes, again, my profound, personal apologies on behalf of Sovereign Airways. Captain Miller has been holding the aircraft and is waiting for you on board. Please, let me personally escort you down the jet bridge." "Thank you, Richard, but I can find my way," Maya said quietly. She reached down and grabbed the handle of her battered, black duffel bag. Before she walked down the ramp, Maya paused. She didn't look at Richard, and she didn't look at the crowd. She turned her head slowly to look directly at Beatrice. Beatrice was now clutching her own elbows, hugging herself as tears of hot, absolute humiliation finally welled in her heavily masquerade eyes. The crowd of passengers watched in absolute, pin-drop silence. "You know," Maya said, her voice carrying easily, crystal clear through the quiet gate. It wasn't spoken with malice, but with a cold, hard truth that cut deeper than any insult. "If I really was just a broke college student who saved up all year to buy a nice ticket to go home, you still wouldn't have had the right to treat me like garbage." Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear cutting a track through her foundation. "It's not just about who my dad is," Maya continued, her voice unwavering. "It's about who you are. And someone like you shouldn't be working with people." Maya turned, her scuffed Jordan sneakers squeaking slightly on the floor, and walked down the jet bridge, disappearing into the aircraft to claim her seat. Richard waited until the heavy door of the jet bridge clicked shut before he turned his attention back to Beatrice. The protective, damage control customer service mask vanished entirely. There was no manager-to-employee camaraderie left. There was only the brutal reality of consequence. "Beatrice, give me your badge, give me your radio." And give me your gate keys, Richard demanded, holding out his open palm, his tone flat and uncompromising. Richard, please. Beatrice openly wept now, her meticulously styled hair coming undone, strands sticking to her wet cheeks. I have 22 years with this company. I have a pension. I have a life here. Please don't do this here. Let's go to the office. You did this here. Richard shot back instantly, pointing an accusing finger at the crowd of first-class passengers who had watched her humiliate a teenager just minutes prior. You humiliated a passenger in public, for your own amusement. Now you get to face the consequences in public. Badge. Now, with trembling, defeated hands, Beatrice unclipped her Sovereign Airways ID badge from her lapel. She unhooked the heavy radio from her belt. She dropped them both into Richard's waiting hand, the cheap plastic and heavy metal clattering loudly against each other, the final, pathetic sound of a 22-year career coming to a sudden, permanent end. The following morning, the violent rainstorm that had battered JFK International had finally passed, leaving behind a crisp, unforgivingly bright November sky. The morning sunlight poured relentlessly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the administrative suites in Terminal 4. But inside the sterile, glass-walled confines of Conference Room B, the atmosphere possessed a completely different kind of cold. It was the absolute, suffocating chill of a corporate execution. Beatrice Carmichael sat at the far end of a massive, polished mahogany table. For 22 years, she had worn her tailored, navy blue Sovereign Airways uniform like a suit of armor. It had granted her authority, respect, and a profound sense of superiority. Now, stripped of the physical symbol of her power, she felt terrifyingly exposed. Dressed in a plain beige turtleneck and gray slacks, she looked remarkably small, blending into the drab colors of the office furniture. The immaculate, lacquered French twists that usually crowned her head had been abandoned in favor of a low, defeated ponytail. Her face was pale and drawn. Her eyes, usually sharp and judging, were heavily bloodshot from a sleepless night spent staring at her apartment ceiling, helplessly replaying the disastrous 3 minutes that had violently unraveled her entire life. Across the wide expanse of the mahogany table sat 2 executioners. To her left was Susan Abernathy, Sovereign Airways Regional Director of Human Resources. Susan was a woman whose entire lucrative career was built on mitigating corporate liability and severing problematic ties with surgical precision. She wore a sharp gray suit and an expression of utter, professional detachment. To Beatrice's right sat Tom Higgins, the senior representative for the Gate Agents Union. Under normal circumstances, Tom was a loud, combative bulldog of a man who would fight tooth and nail over a 10-minute lunch break discrepancy. Today, he was slumped in his ergonomic chair, staring intensely at a blank notepad, pointedly avoiding Beatrice's desperate gaze. The silence in the room stretched on for an agonizing minute, punctuated only by the faint, clinical hum of the central air conditioning. Susan Abernathy finally broke the silence. She didn't offer a greeting. She simply reached into her leather portfolio, extracted a thick manila folder, and slid it smoothly across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of Beatrice's folded hands. The label on the tab read, in stark, undeniable black ink, Carmichael, B. Termination of employment. Beatrice stared at the letters until they blurred. Her throat tightened so painfully she could barely swallow. I don't understand, Beatrice whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling, cracking under the weight of the moment. She looked away from the folder, pleadingly turning her eyes to the union rep. Tom, please, you have to fight this. I have 22 years with this company. 22 years. My record is spotless. I've never even been written up for a uniform violation. One misunderstanding, Tom. One mistake with a passenger on a bad night. It wasn't just a passenger, Bea, Tom interrupted, his voice lacking any of its usual fiery conviction. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking deeply exhausted, like a man who had already lost a war before he even stepped onto the battlefield. And it wasn't a mistake. We cannot defend this. It was targeted harassment, malicious destruction of passenger property, and a severe, undeniable breach of company protocol. Tom finally looked up, his eyes full of pity, which somehow hurt Beatrice worse than anger. We reviewed the security footage from Gate B22 at 5 o'clock this morning, B. We also listened to the high-definition audio from your desk microphone. You didn't even ask to verify her identification before you accused her of a federal crime in front of 50 people. The system flagged the corporate master account. Beatrice desperately repeated, clinging to the only fragile defense her panicked mind could construct. She leaned forward, her voice rising in pitch. It said Master Corporate Booking. We've had a rash of stolen mileage accounts lately. I was trained to look for discrepancies. Her attire, her luggage, she didn't match the standard profile of our premium cabin clientele. I was protecting the airline's assets. Susan Abernathy folded her hands neatly over her own copy of the termination paperwork. Her expression didn't shift by a single millimeter. Beatrice, the account in question was the Sovereign Executive Apex account, Susan stated, her tone flatter than a heart monitor flatline. It is a locked, unhackable, top-tier designation used exclusively by our board of directors and the chief executive officer. A simple glance at the secondary profile notes on your screen, which you neglected to open, would have clearly shown you the passenger was David Hayes's daughter. Instead, you made a snap assumption based entirely on her age, her race, and her clothing. Beatrice flinched violently, as if Susan had physically reached across the table and struck her. The ugly reality of her own prejudice, laid out in sterile corporate terms, was suffocating. I am not a racist, Susan. Beatrice gasped, hot tears of indignation and terror finally spilling over her lashes. I am a professional. I have given my entire adult life to the reputation of this airline. Professionalism does not involve overriding a confirmed Diamond Elite ticket, tearing a $10,000 boarding pass in half, and throwing it in the trash while mocking the passenger, Susan replied, her voice remaining terrifyingly even. Furthermore, professionalism does not involve threatening the CEO's child with arrest. David Hayes was personally on speakerphone. He heard every single word you said to her. Susan leaned forward slightly, closing the distance to deliver the final blow. Mr. Hayes didn't even sleep last night. He called my office at 4 a.m. He wanted you escorted off airport property by armed security last night, but Richard Sterling had already managed to de-escalate the situation and strip you of your credentials. You are entirely out of options, Beatrice. Beatrice's lower lip trembled uncontrollably. The fight drained out of her body, leaving a hollow, echoing void of panic. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down on her like a physical weight, crushing her chest. So, that's it? Beatrice breathed, her eyes darting between Susan and Tom. You're just firing me? Just like that? Effective immediately, Susan confirmed, tapping a manicured fingernail against the manila folder. Under Section 4, Paragraph B of your union contract, gross misconduct and severe brand damage. Because you are being terminated for cause, with documented evidence of malicious behavior, your standard severance package is completely voided. Beatrice gasped, instinctively clapping a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. My severance? But my pension? My flight benefits? For an airline employee who had dedicated 2 decades of her life to the tarmac, lifetime flight privileges were the ultimate prize. It meant free, first-class standby travel anywhere in the world. Forever. It was the golden parachute Beatrice had banked on for her retirement. It was her entire future. Your vested pension remains intact, of course. We cannot legally touch funds you have already accrued, Susan explained clinically, showing no remorse. However, your Sovereign Airways flight privileges for both you and any registered family members are permanently revoked as of this morning. Furthermore, because of the high-profile nature of this incident and the security risk you pose to a VIP, Mr. Hayes has instructed our legal team to flag your profile in the shared airline security database. You will not be hireable at Delta, United, American, JetBlue, or any of our international partner carriers. The words hung in the air, a devastating sentence of permanent exile. You're blacklisting me, Beatrice whispered, the tears streaming freely down her cheeks now, ruining her bare face. You're taking my whole life away. My career, my retirement, my reputation. Because of one girl in sweatpants. Tom Higgins sighed heavily. He stood up, snapping his briefcase shut with a loud, final click. He couldn't even bear to look her in the eye anymore. B, Tom said softly, his voice heavy with the grim reality of her own making. You didn't just insult a girl in sweatpants. You insulted the owner of the house while standing in his living room. You humiliated his daughter for sport. There is no coming back from that. Tom gestured toward the pen resting beside the folder. Sign the papers. It doesn't mean you agree. It just acknowledges receipt. Once you're done, gather your personal items from your locker in the break room. I'll walk you to the parking garage. Beatrice slowly reached out and picked up the heavy black pen sitting on the mahogany table. Her hand shook so violently that she could barely maintain a grip on the smooth plastic. She flipped open the folder to the signature line. Through blurred, tear-filled vision, she pressed the pen to the paper. Her signature, usually a flourishing, confident script, was nothing more than an illegible, jagged scratch, a broken line marking the exact moment her reign ended. As she stood up on unsteady legs, leaving the folder behind, the silence in the conference room mirrored the deafening silence she had commanded at Gate B-22 the night before. Only this time, the absolute power belonged to someone else, and the echo of its strike had severed her career forever. 6 months later, the sweltering mid-July heat baked the cracked asphalt outside of Newark Liberty International Airport, sending shimmering waves of distortion radiating off the tarmac. Inside Terminal B, the aging air conditioning system was losing a desperate battle against the crush of summer travelers. The atmosphere was thick, stifling, and smelled faintly of stress, sweat, cheap Auntie Anne's pretzels, and the unmistakable, frantic energy of people who were already running late. For Beatrice Carmichael, this terminal was a vivid, waking nightmare. The past 6 months had aged her a decade. Without her high-status job at Sovereign Airways, her entire identity had completely dissolved. She wasn't just unemployed, she was permanently exiled from the only kingdom she had ever known. Blacklisted from every major carrier and stripped of her lifetime flight privileges, she had been forced into a brutal financial reality check. She had downsized her pristine 2-bedroom apartment to a cramped studio, cut back on every luxury, and, worst of all, she now had to actually pay for her own airfare out of pocket to visit her sister in Florida. Because she was on a strict, unforgiving budget, the legacy carriers she used to revere were entirely out of her price range. She was flying Sunjet Airlines, a notoriously cheap, bare-bones, ultra-low-cost carrier that charged extra for everything from printed boarding passes to a cup of tap water. Beatrice dragged a scuffed, wheeled suitcase toward the check-in counters. She was dressed for survival, not status. Wearing a pair of loose, comfortable linen pants and a baggy, faded blue sweater, she looked nothing like the terrifyingly sharp, unapproachable gatekeeper of JFK's Gate B-22. Her hair, once a structural masterpiece of hairspray and pins, was tied back in a simple, messy claw clip. The heavy, dark bags under her eyes matched the exhaustion in her posture. She looked tired. She looked ordinary. She looked exactly like the type of passenger she used to relentlessly sneer at. The line for Sunjet was a chaotic, winding snake of misery. It zigzagged back and forth through the velvet stanchions, packed tight with screaming toddlers, exhausted parents sitting on their luggage, and aggressive, sunburned tourists. Beatrice stood in the queue for 45 agonizing minutes. Her feet throbbed. The strap of her heavy purse dug into her shoulder. With every agonizingly slow shuffle forward, Beatrice's internal monologue screamed in protest. I used to command the red carpet. I used to decide who flew and who stayed behind. I shouldn't be here. But the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights overhead offered no sympathy. Finally, she reached the front of the line. Behind the counter stood Brittany, a 20-something gate agent aggressively snapping a bright pink piece of bubble gum. Brittany's uniform was rumpled, her name tag was crooked, and she was openly scrolling through social media on her phone, barely looking up as Beatrice approached the desk. Confirmation number, Brittany mumbled, her voice flat and entirely devoid of customer service polish. She didn't even make eye contact. Beatrice immediately bristled, her old instincts flaring to life. The sheer disrespect of the greeting made her jaw clench. Good morning to you too, Beatrice said, her voice tight as she tried to summon a fraction of her former authority. My name is Beatrice Carmichael. I'm flying to Orlando. She slid her self-printed, crumpled paper itinerary across the scratched laminate counter. Brittany finally looked up, pausing her scrolling just long enough to eye Beatrice up and down. The look was one of profound boredom mixed with mild disdain. She snatched the paper, typed loudly and aggressively on her keyboard, and let out a heavy, put-upon sigh. You're in boarding group 8, Brittany said, pointing a finger adorned with long, acrylic nails at Beatrice's suitcase. That bag is too big to be your free personal item. Put it in the sizer. Beatrice's eyes widened indignantly. The blood rushed to her cheeks. Excuse me? It is a standard carry-on. It fits perfectly in any standard overhead bin. I know the exact dimensions. I worked in the airline industry for 22 years. Brittany popped her gum loudly, the sound cracking like a tiny whip in the tense air between them. Don't care, she replied, completely unfazed by Beatrice's resume. Put it in the metal sizer. If it doesn't fit completely inside, it's $100 gate check fee. Gritting her teeth so hard her jaw ached, Beatrice grabbed the handle of her suitcase. Her hands were shaking. She hoisted the bag up and shoved it into the unforgiving metal baggage sizer, positioned next to the desk. Because she had packed it too tightly, desperate to avoid paying for a checked bag, the fabric bulged. One of the hard plastic wheels caught on the top edge of the metal frame, leaving a stubborn half-inch of the bag sticking out. Beatrice pushed on it. She shoved it, but the wheel was wedged. Doesn't fit, Brittany declared instantly. A cruel little smirk began to play on Brittany's lips. It wasn't a smile of genuine amusement. It was the smile of someone who suddenly had absolute power over a desperate stranger and was thoroughly enjoying the leverage. Beatrice's breath hitched in her throat. She stared at that smirk. It was a smirk she knew intimately. She had seen it in the mirror thousands of times. It was the exact same toxic, triumphant expression she had worn 6 months ago when she ripped Maya Hayes' first-class ticket in half. The visceral gut punch of seeing her own cruelty reflected perfectly back at her made Beatrice dizzy. Are you blind? It's just the wheel. Beatrice's voice rose in pitch, the humiliation, grief, and sheer frustration of the past half year finally bubbling over into a public panic. If I just push it, it fits. It's perfectly fine. You are extorting me. I want to speak to your supervisor. Right now. The crowded line behind Beatrice began to groan. A man a few feet back muttered, "Come on, lady, pay the fee or move. We're gonna miss our flight." Brittany leaned forward over the counter, the smirk vanishing, replaced by a cold, hardened glare. "Ma'am, lower your voice," Brittany said, her tone dropping into a deadly quiet warning. "You're flying a budget airline. You bought a $50 ticket. You don't get to demand a supervisor because you don't want to follow the rules. Now, you can hand over your credit card for the $100 fee, or I can cancel your reservation right now as a disruptive passenger. Your choice." Beatrice froze. The words hung heavy in the stifling terminal air, a flawless, devastating mirror of her own past arrogance. "I can cancel your reservation right now. Your choice." She looked at Brittany's crooked name tag. She looked back at the impatient, fiercely judging faces of the dozens of passengers behind her, all of them viewing her as nothing more than a nuisance holding up their day. She looked down at her baggy, faded sweater and her slightly oversized bag wedged in the cold metal bars. In that harsh, unforgiving moment, the full, crushing weight of karma finally landed squarely on her shoulders, heavy enough to break whatever pride she had left. She wasn't the gatekeeper anymore. She was just a tired, stressed-out traveler, entirely at the mercy of someone else's power trip. She was exactly where she had put so many others. With a shaking, defeated hand, Beatrice reached into her heavy purse. She pulled out her credit card and silently handed it across the counter. She didn't argue. She didn't say another word. She stood in silence as the receipt printed, took her boarding pass, yanked her bag free from the sizer, and walked heavily toward the chaotic security checkpoint. She was a ghost of the woman she used to be, finally understanding, down to her very bones, exactly what it felt like to be treated like you simply don't belong. The story of Beatrice Carmichael is a brutal, real-world masterclass in why true professionalism means treating the CEO and the college student with the exact same level of dignity. Beatrice built her entire identity on exclusivity and prejudice, weaponizing her small amount of power to humiliate those she deemed unworthy. She didn't lose her career because she made an honest mistake. She lost it because her mask slipped, revealing a cruel, judgmental core that cost her everything she valued. Karma has a funny way of leveling the playing field, ensuring that the very people who build walls are eventually forced to climb them from the outside. If this story reminded you to always stay humble and never judge a book by its cover, hit that like button, share this with someone who loves a good karma story, and subscribe for more incredible real-life drama.